I'm pretty sure of the image that flashes into your mind when people tell you to think Frankenstein. If it's not the weighted boot wearing, lumbering, flat headed monster of the Universal series, it is one of the dozen others you have seen throughout the years. And while I won't say that's not Frankenstein, I will say that is not Mary Godwin's Frankenstein. And I mean in a metaphorical sense. I know Frankenstein being the doctor and not the creation is the most pedantic correction on the internet. Besides, it kind of misses the point of the whole thing as I have seen it.
I'm ready, Frankenstein. And
In her now genre defining 1818 novel, Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, there are themes we all know about, but the more I read the actual book, the more I find something more tragic and personal, weirdly related to Saw 3D.
History is a passion for me.
There is something beneath this powerful gothic sci-fi horror story about grief and betrayal, the hubris of a man whose brilliance leaves bodies in his wake. I wanted to break down some of the themes in Frankenstein that I have only seen so directly handled in the novel itself, as well as how it's been lost amongst the many, many film adaptations over the years. I've read the book. I've watched as many of the movies as I could get my hands on. And I have been researching this as soon as I heard Del Toro had a new movie coming out, honestly. So let's dig deep into Shelley's calcified heart and take a look at the hidden themes of Frankenstein.
Trojan, ecstasy condoms, feels like nothing is there.
Provided you caught something there.
Now, The Modern Prometheus has been called the first modern science fiction novel by scholars like J.M. van der Laan, who doesn't argue it's not the first story to have science fiction elements. I mean, robots and automatons have been around since ancient Greece, not to mention Lucian of Samosata's novella A True Story or Vera Historia, where adventurers are literally swept off to the moon. Von der Laan argues that what Frankenstein pioneers was the cautionary tale of science without ethics. Honestly, calling it science fiction horror risks missing the forest for the trees. It is about so much more than just mad scientists and labs. These are things that the author picked up on from her unique upbringing, both being an educated woman and living in a time of industrial reinvention. Mary wasn't just writing about reanimating corpses off the cuff. Galvani's experiments in electricity would have been well known to the entire Shelley crew. So while the corpses of prisoners were allegedly standing up after being shocked, and twitching frogs became less real over time, it was, and still is, very grounded in real anxieties around science. It's about hubris, Victor Frankenstein overreaching. In the words of Universal's doctor,
now I know what it feels like to be God.
Victor is the modern Prometheus, stealing the fire of life, punished when his light is brought down to the world of man. It's about isolation, how the creature, depending on the adaptation, isn't created evil. He is slowly eroded by rejection and his father's abandonment. It's others' disgust of the creature that shapes him.
All men hate the wretched. How then must I be hated, who am miserable beyond all living things?
The creature becomes the ultimate outsider. Even in a genre built on monsters, Dracula has his wives, the Wolfman usually has someone to mourn his inevitable death, but our favorite experiments? All he gets is a blind friend for all of 5 minutes before even that is ripped away from him.
Sometimes in our preoccupation with worldly matters,
When the monster is given a voice, he can only lament about how lonely, lost, and without friends he is, something always implied even when the monster cannot speak. There are the themes of responsibility that come with being a parent, the obligations one owes to the beings they bring into the world. The book wants us to understand that it is Victor's abandoning of the monster that leads to every death that follows. I mean, the novel specifically references Paradise Lost, famously a story about consequences and the conflict of pride and rebellion. the loss of innocence. Think about the name the creature gives himself, Adam, first of his kind, shown the light of knowledge, but at the cost of the innocent thing he first was. Or it is just a story about being the other, as we just talked about. Frankenstein himself alienates himself in his work. While we get so much from his creature's perspective of being entirely othered from the rest of the world. I would not be the first person to suggest these themes and more, tying the creature and this story to how the disabled are treated, about colonialism. There is even a healthy sprinkling of well-deserved queer theory in there. As much as Frankenstein is a monster movie, it's a tragedy of neglect that plays out in a broken, stitched-together form.
Great cereal, Frankenberry.
Frankly, it's very good. Our visitor, perhaps he'd like a monster for breakfast today.
The real Frankenstein.
This monster's not on the menu.
But Frankenberry cereal is. Strawberry-flavored marshmallows? It's part of his complete breakfast.
Good.
How about a monster for breakfast today?
So, how did Hollywood turn Frankenstein into visceral spectacle? First, it has to be said Hollywood was not the first, as stage plays brought Mary Shelley's stories to audiences long before James Whale cast Boris Karloff in his 1931 film. It appeared even in stage plays as early as 1823. The experiment was being characterized as more of a mute brute on stage. Mary Shelley even got to see one of these stage plays, as she writes in a letter.
On Friday, August 29th, Jane, my father, William and I went to the theatre to see it. Wallach looked very well as Frankenstein. He is at the beginning full of hope and expectation at the end of the first act. The stage represents a room with a staircase leading to Frankenstein's workshop. He goes to it and you see his light at a small window through which a frightened servant peeps, who runs off in terror when Frankenstein exclaims, "It lives!"
She goes on to say,
The story is not well managed, but Cook played the monster's part extremely well.
although
I was much amused, and it appeared to excite a breathless eagerness in the audience.
So, while Whale is my favorite director from this period, I can't even say the novel's creator cared whether his flat-headed monster with neck folds lurched around and mumbled through the first movie, even if Shelley's creature was a goddamn poet.
And know the ways of man.
I mean, he philosophizes, he is aware, he never meets sympathy outside of a blind man in the woods. He doesn't get an even madder scientist to announce his bride. He never even gets his own bride in the book. The Universal sequels eventually devolve the creature until he is again mute and brain-swapped a few times over. Hammer Studios' features really put the blood and body horror some of us associate with the creature up front and center, and take a totally different approach in following the Doctor and a series of new experiments through Cushing's run of the title role. Mel Brooks' comedy classic Young Frankenstein even turns the creature into shorthand for the big dumb guy that doesn't know his own strength. But again, by all accounts, it sounds like the widow Shelley had an excellent sense of humor. I imagine she would have loved Brooks' adaptation and Abbott and Costello running amok with her creation. But the creature's awareness matters. Through his grief and alienation, this resurrected man takes responsibility for his murders instead of them being treated like an accident or a thrill. That is something more modern adaptations keep trying to go for. There have been a few miniseries, television movies. 1994's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, directed by Hercule Poirot himself, was probably the most famous quote-unquote faithful adaptation until Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein comes along later this year. And if you like looking at the etymology and history of these literary and pop culture icons, how their themes have evolved over the decades, it's the kind of history that fascinates me too, and exactly what I started this channel to hopefully explore, and to help me kind of understand my own passions, but yeah.
Well, you kept very good notes. And of course, I used living parts.
Living parts? What do you mean, living parts? Holy shit! That's not my hand! What are these boobs? Elizabeth, what did you do to me?
I can explain.
Now, if I may, let's get a little personal. And not half as personal as the insanely unfounded rumor that Mary Godwin gave her virginity to Percy Shelley on top of her mother's grave. Godwin started writing the story she'd become famous for when she was still a teenager. At 18, 19 years old, she was already one bad week from becoming Fantine in Les Miserables.
But the tigers come at night with their voices soft as thunder.
When Mary was a minor in our contemporary society, she had eloped with a married poet, Percy Shelley, who had already literally Fantined his first wife to death by abandoning her and the children of this first marriage.
No, life has killed the tree. I dream.
Mary Godwin fell in love with this brilliant man who charmed crowds, ignored pleas from his loved ones, wooed women and men alike, all while being this clear narcissist that people called out even in his day. Wait, doesn't Victor Frankenstein ignore the pleas from his family and loved ones, abandon his fiancée and totally best friend and not Lord Byron lover Clerval for years at a time? He's this brilliant, beautiful, perfect man who can't see the destruction he leaves in his wake. Selfish pursuit. It cramped and narrowed me until your gentleness and affection warmed and opened my senses.
Ha! Gay!
I am not saying that Frankenstein is just a book about how Percy Shelley was really horny for Lord Byron and a really shit husband. That would be one of the most baseless and ill-spirited claims made about Mary Shelley, who, again, already has smutty fan fiction written about her when she was only 16 years old.
I'm so sorry. Get away from me!
Is it that hard of a stretch to think that Mary could have been processing both her love and resentment for the husband who fathered her children while he was married and ignoring his original kids and bride? What I will say is that art often has shadows and vague reflections of the creators involved. I reached out to Erik Clapp from Cinema Force and DC Films about Frankenstein, and he also tied the story into Mary Godwin Shelley's past, but on an extremely different wavelength.
Frankenstein has become more than just a story, a play, or even a movie. It has, like Dr. Frankenstein's creation itself, evolved into a modern-day term of which can be used to fit many definitions of thrown-together travesties. For me personally, it has changed throughout my life, and now it means something different than just a monster projected on my wall in 8mm by my dad. And although that initial image impacted me more than I can say Dracula or the Wolfman, I've often wondered why that was. And as I've grown older, I've become more fascinated with the character because of its origins with its author, Mary Shelley. Shelley's idea of Dr. Frankenstein's creature was born from a traumatic experience herself of losing a child. Her desire to bring life back to something taken from her is reflected in all of her works. And no matter what iteration of Victor Frankenstein you choose to consume, Shelley's loss is embedded in that character. The creature itself, often mistakenly referred to as Frankenstein, is both Shelley's hope and fear of a man-made resurrection from the beyond. As you age, you begin to experience more loss than you can possibly imagine. Each loss begins to become increasingly personal. This could include pets, parents, and close friends. The idea of them not being in your life is akin to removing your own body parts, limb from limb. Shelley grasped that, and used that to create an avatar for all of her pain. All of us wonder at times, would we bring someone back if we could? And science has certainly progressed to the point where we most certainly can via cloning for animals. And let us not forget the chatter around artificial intelligence, where one will certainly be able to replicate a human's brain from one deteriorating body to a cybernetic one. This is certainly what Shelley was thinking of when she created Dr. Frankenstein's monster. Media has certainly kept the Frankenstein theory fresh in everyone's mind from the endless iterations on parade, but Shelley's theory is beyond that of just a modern-day IP. It's almost here. It is a primal part of every human being. Loss is not something we can fathom, and Frankenstein is that reflection of our own fears and desires, staring us right in the face and confronting us with the reality of humankind's own self-obsessions.
That was me. What a stiff. Back then, my achy joints made it hard for me to get around. So I tried Osteobiflex. Osteobiflex has helped so many renew their joints and their lives. You see, it's not temporary relief.
So when I was rereading Frankenstein this time, these themes really stuck out to me for some reason. Perhaps because I know so much more about the author and her life story now. Maybe because I get the same vibes watching Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Okie dokie, Dr. Jones, hold on to your potatoes.
You know, the Indiana Jones movie that everyone said was their least favorite before the turn of the century hit? The one that is notoriously darker, a little meaner towards women. The one that George Lucas notoriously wrote in the middle of his divorce. It's the same vibe I get watching the, surprisingly, only outwardly misogynistic movie in the Saw franchise, The Final Chapter.
I think we're breaking up with you, Tina.
It wasn't. Where the woman who stars in the movie gets brutally torn apart more than once just so happened to be in a divorce with the movie's producer. The same movie that drags an innocent woman to her knees and cooks her alive because of her lying husband. It's not that either of these movies outright say they hate women, but there is a stark difference between how women are treated even in their own series. The tone becomes more about mocking, in Saw's case, somehow becoming even more cruel and bitter. My most recent reading of Frankenstein absolutely still had all those themes I mentioned before, but it also feels like a fuck you novel almost, where everyone so clearly loves and wants to strangle this brilliant man while holding him on a pedestal. I feel the same bitter and mocking nature about this poor, sad genius that gets his friends and loved ones killed but can't admit he done fucked up.
Now, the TMC Horror Marathon continues with one guy who needs a chiropractor and another guy who needs a shave. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman.
I am always going to love Frankenstein. Not only does Adam and the Invisible Man represent science fiction and horror to me, it is just a brilliant story. We have talked about how many themes Mary Shelley managed to cram in a 300-page novel, but I gotta know what you think. Am I putting way too many words in the author's mouth? Is Frankenstein in any way, shape, or form about the writer's home life? Frankenstein is not going away anytime soon, in the pop culture zeitgeist or this channel. I am spending the rest of this month talking about every Frankenstein movie I could get my hands on. I'm going to spend a week breaking down the Universal series, the Hammer series, the direct adaptations, the weird movies that just kind of use the Frankenstein name. I'm even dedicating a week to just talk about documentaries and supplemental Frankenstein materials I went over. But for that to happen, I have to catch Grover Cleveland's presidential time machine. I will see you next week for sure. Just please remember to be a better person than Victor Frankenstein, because holy shit, he sucked. Upcoming episodes on Heisei Godzilla, Doctor Who, The Second Doctor, Avatar The Last Airbender, Seven Samurai, Dungeons and Dragons.